All right, Shalom Israel. First and foremost, as always, I would like to give all praises, honor, glory, respect, and blessings to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham, Rachaha Quadash. Salutations to the Lord's elect on the four corners of the earth, pushing His truth and sincerity while patiently waiting for Yahweh Shai's return. Double honors to our apostles and elders of great millstone, which have taught us everything we know through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. And I wanted to do a podcast going into how we are almost out of this captivity, and from how things are looking in the news, this could very well be a very hot summer. And you should know what I mean by a very hot summer. You know, a lot's been going on, a lot of tornadoes, a lot of fires have broken out, forest fires that is, you know, and a lot of these tornadoes and hurricanes and floods and these so-called natural disasters that are, you know, taking away people's homes and all that is causing them to have to relocate and have to move in with family members, you know, which can cause distress, it can cause discomfort, it can cause the cost of, it can cause, you know, people have to fork out more money just to, you know, take care of themselves, their family, you know, not to mention, you know, we got ICE out there, and now we have civilians talking about, you know, setting up factions, malicious groups, etc., in order to take a stand against the U.S. government. Because a lot of people is beginning to wake up and see that Donald Trump is not for them. You know, which goes into 2nd Esdras, the 15th chapter, the 14th verse, where it says, "Woe to the world and them that dwell therein." Because people taking up arms and, you know, going to fight against the government, that is a prophetic prophecy of 2nd Esdras 15 verse 14. And I believe down to 16. In verse 15 it says, "For the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands." Okay. And the modern day sword is the gun, what proves that these civil and race wars are going to be fought with guns. Okay. Now in verse 16, right, it says, "For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another." Okay. And what is a sedition? A sedition would be a rebellion or a uprising against a higher authority or a government. And that is exactly, you know, that is exactly what we are witnessing here. You know, we're witnessing right before our eyes through the modern day Euromancer theorem, which will be, you know, your TV, your laptop, your phone, whatever you can use to access the internet to be able to watch videos, where we're witnessing people creating social media accounts, speaking of, you know, coming together for a sedition against the U.S. government, saying that we need to take up arms. It's time to lace in your winter boots. You know, in other words, get ready to make a stand against the government, because people every day, more and more people is waking up to the government corruption. Okay, for decades, you people have been voting and voting and voting, when in reality your votes don't count. Okay, your presidents are not elected, your presidents are selected. And who are your presidents selected by? Your governments are selected by the powers that be of this society, the so-called elites, okay, who basically rule the entire world, which will be the Edomites, who would be said to have control over the whole face of the whole earth. According to Job 9 verse 24, the earth is given into the hands of the wicked. Okay, going back to Genesis, the 27th chapter, okay, Esau, who is Edom, according to Genesis, the 36th chapter, would be blessed with the fatness of the earth. And that fatness of the earth is talking about how he would be given control over the whole fatness of the earth. Okay, so there's plenty of videos on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, of people that are speaking about, taking up arms and fighting against their country. And of course, you're gonna have some Israelites up in there, so-called Negro, Latino, and Native Indians, and them whose father's lineage on their father's side go back to the so-called Negro, Latino, and Native Indians. Okay, they're gonna take up arms, but they're gonna get caught up, and the slaughter that's gonna be taking place. Because see, the U.S. government, according to the Posse Comitatus Act that was passed in, I believe, the 1800s, the Posse Comitatus Act forbid the U.S. government from using his own military against his own people. So the U.S. government is not going to use his military to subdue his own civilians. The U.S. government is going to use the UN Army. That's why you have UN troops over here right now, even as I speak. Okay, because these UN troops consist of military mercenaries from different countries, whether if they are from Iran, you have a little bit of Ishmael up there. Now, of course, the Iranians will be the East Indians, the Elamites. Okay, you got a little bit of the Russians up in there, which are Edomites. You got some of the Chinese, which they come in the form of Gurkha troops, Chinese troops over here. Okay, those are the Moabites. You got a little bit of Japanese troops over here, in the form of the, you got Japanese troops over here, which will be the biblical Ammonites. You got some African troops over here, which will be your biblical Hamites. And all these troops over here on the soils of America, whether if they're sleeper cells or whether if they are activated, but they're at a base waiting for further commands, all these troops have a deep hatred for you American people. Okay? And especially you so-called Negro, Latino, and Native Indians who want to, make a stand for this country. So all hell's getting ready to break loose in America. You already got people stockpiling on food, water, you know. You know, you got people stockpiling on supplies. People's gearing up for civil war against their people. Hence, which is why when you read 2nd Esdras 15 verse 16, it says, "For there shall be sedition among people and invading one another." Okay, and how one people in verse 15 it said, "One people shall stand and fight against another and swords in their hands." That's civil war right there. It's the one people is talking about your civilians over here in America. The another people is talking about against the government. Okay, so you're going to have that. You're either going to have factions that's set up by the government who would appear as U.S. civilians that's going to be roaming, that's going to be driving around killing U.S. citizens. So it's going to get very messy out here. Very, very messy. And if the Spirit of the Lord is not dealing with you, you're going to get caught up in all this mayhem and madness. All right, so that's why earlier this year brothers spoke about getting your house in order, which your house is talking about your abode in which your spirit abides in, which will be your body. And you get your body right by getting into the good graces of Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. Seeing that we are in a grace period still, you have a grace period to actually get right with the Lord. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this podcast, man. Hey, we're almost out of here. We know that during Jacob's trouble, the chip is going to be made mandatory. And it's not just the U.S. citizens that are, moving quickly in an attempt to subdue the government for a better change. It's not just the people. Okay, it's the so-called elites. They have an agenda too. A new world order. And a part of their new world order is that, people got to get chipped. People got to take a implantable device. So, with that, I'm going to say shalom. It's on to the next one.